right. Hi, everyone. So, welcome to Experts Unplugged Speaker Spotlights from the Craft Brewers Conference. And I'm Joanne Newborn of Newborn Evolution. I'm super excited to be here today with John Hyman. And he actually spoke right after I did at the conference. And we had very different talks, which we're going to talk about. But we're also going to go into some of the trends that we saw and really give everyone a little bit of feedback about what we saw at the conference this year, especially if you didn't get to attend, or if you did attend, it was quite large. So if you didn't get to attend all the parts of it. So John is a nationally recognized employment lawyer with more than 30 years experience advising businesses on their most challenging workplace issues. And in recent years, he's also built a prominent niche in the craft beer industry. He is the go-to legal advisor and frequent speaker at national and regional brewing conferences. He's also the chair of his organization and labor practice group and its craft practice group. So he's got lots of knowledge and insights, and he's got a blog that I actually was reading before I came on here. Really, really interesting and fun blog, but a lot of good details as well in terms of legal advice and insights. So welcome, John.
Not,
Thank you
not
for
legal
joining me.
advice. Lawyers do not give
Sorry.
legal advice on social media. Legal information.
Thank you for that correction. A very important one.
My chief ethics officer at the firm would be very mad with me if I did not clear that up. So
thank you for clarifying that. So yeah, tell me a little bit about your talk. In fact, we were chatting just before this, and you said you were one of the only HR focused talks at the conference. So yeah, tell me a little bit about it. The title, you said it was a full room, which was great.
yeah, it was a full room. The title was Happy Staff, Better Craft. It was about addressing how breweries can best address some of the negative issues that their employees face that are frankly just kind of inherent in the industry. Long hours, low pay, high stress, etc. But how you can proactively address them within your brewery to better engage your workforce, to make for a happier, more productive, and ultimately more profitable business.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, what were some of the areas that people were most interested in terms of what you were talking about? Because we were talking about, like, we both had a long list of questions that we didn't get to answer, which we promised we will. I promise that I will answer them as soon as I get them from the Brewers Association. There were more questions than we had time for, but what were the things that really popped for you?
Yeah, that's a sign of a good talk, right? When you get more, when you get more questions and you have time to answer because your audience is listening and engaged. People wanted to talk about burnout. People wanted to talk about how to the biggest kind of cluster of questions were focused around the issue of, like, what do you do when the owner is the person causing the problems? I talked a lot about, like, managing toxic workplaces and how you deal with toxic employees. And, like, we need to stop making the excuse, like, they make really good beer, so we're going to justify them being, I said it multiple times, like my law firm, we have a no assholes rule. We don't hire assholes. If you're an asshole, we don't let you work here. That is, I think, a great rule for businesses to follow. But what do you do when that person is also the head brewer or your most popular server who can turn it on when they're dealing with the customers, but then when they're with their coworkers, they're like a nightmare to deal with, right? So or when it's the owner of the business, which we see particularly in smaller businesses in the beer space. A lot of these are small, very small businesses. What do you do when it's the owner that's creating the problem? If you're like the manager, right, the general manager, the back of house manager, the front of house manager, whatever, like, how do you deal with that if you want to create a more positive work experience for the people that report to you, but the person who's creating the problem is the person you report to? If you have other If it's an ownership team, going to the other owners would be one possible solution to see if they can kind of do an intervention. Um, uh, if it's an ownership of one and they're not going to listen to you, then maybe the answer is you're not going to be able to impart change, and you just got to leave because you're not going to be able to fix the problem. And the
Mm.
business will likely, in my experience, the business will not survive because you can't survive, operating in that kind of environment. So that the biggest cluster of questions, which kind of signals to me that that's an issue people might be dealing with in their breweries. But there was a large cluster of questions around that issue.
Well, it's so interesting because we work with some smaller organizations as well. And, when you start a business, you don't think about all the different things that are going to be involved in it. And one of the things that I really stress is developing the culture that you want. It starts with the vision, but then the culture. And sometimes business owners get frustrated with me and they say, all you do is talk about leadership and culture. But that's really where it starts. If you have the right culture, then that you're modeling that for everybody in your organization, and it starts with you. If you have a toxic culture, everyone else in the organization has permission, right? They're going to interpret that unconsciously as permission to treat the rest of the team that way. So it has that domino effect, which is really unhealthy. And like you said, they're going to have massive turnover, which gets very expensive, and ultimately a business is not going to survive.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you model as a leader, you model the behavior that you end up getting in your business. And so if you model toxicity, that's what you're going to get trickling down, because your behavior justifies or excuses everyone else behaving that way. And you can't ever expect to hold anyone else accountable for bad behavior if they see that's what you do as the leader of the organization. So yeah, so culture starts at the top. I said a couple times in my presentation, I had a couple slides on this. I think it's such an important point. I mean, culture is what you tolerate. That sets your culture. And if you condone, if you allow bad behavior, that is your culture. It doesn't matter what you say. It's what, it's what you do. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. That's interesting that you said that was a theme, because like I said, most business owners, when they're starting out, their focus is on something else, right? The focus is on making great craft beer. And you're not thinking about all the other things that go into really being, the CEO of your business, regardless of what kind of business it
Which
is.
is what I mean. If you walk around the floor at CBC and talk to the brewery owners, you're going to hear the same story over and over again, which is like, I made great beer I made great beer in my garage or in my basement. All my friends love my beer. And then, that everyone said, oh, you should open a brewery. So I opened a brewery, and now you're a business owner and you have people that you're responsible for, people's livelihoods that work for you, and you're responsible for running a team, and you're operating on a highly regulated industry, right? You can't just depending on the state you're in, you might not be able to go to the bodega down the street and get your beer on their shelf without working through a distributor, right? So
Yeah.
you are in a highly regulated industry, and people don't there is a big disconnect, I think, in the thought process between I'm going to open a business to what it means to actually run a business. And particularly in our industry, where like margins are thin and you might not want to go get the professional help you need because you don't want to eat into your already thin profits. But you need, people always ask me, like, when do you need like when do you need some HR function in your business? It's really like, as soon as you have employees, you need human resources, and that can look very differently. It could be like a controller or a CFO that wears an HR hat from time to time. It could be a manager that does, assuming they have the right training to handle those issues. But you really need someone with someone who wears an HR hat as soon as you have one person on your payroll. And it's issues that businesses don't think about.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned the distribution piece. So that was the focus of my talk, was really about how to create that partnership with your distributors. And I think, along the lines of, all of a sudden I gave birth to a business. Um, People think, great, I have a distributor now and I've signed a contract and I'm going to walk away, and they're going to sell my product for me and it's going to be great, without thinking about how huge their portfolios are, and they can't possibly know about all the brands unless you're there helping, educating, making it as simple as possible for them, and actually being out in the field with them. I always tell people they're actually part of your team as well. So when you're thinking about your whole team, your distributors are one area of your team. They're not someone that works for you. They are actually a partner with you. So there's lots of nuances, and I'm sure it must feel very overwhelming for people that are owning their breweries. And I've seen some of them like really grow and grow and grow, which is amazing. And I think you're right, like the ones that are willing to put the time and the effort and their revenue into hiring the right people to help them are the ones that are going to grow the fastest.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, coming back to the distributor piece, I mean, you got to realize that you are one product in a portfolio of dozens, hundreds, thousands, right? That are competing for the same shelf space, right? At retail. And if you're not holding that distributor's hands, why would you ever expect that they're going to give your product priority with the retailers that they're selling into? So it is certain. I couldn't imagine just deploying like a set it and forget it model with a distributor, where you're just going to say, "Here's my product, and now go sell it for me," and I'm wait for the money to roll in. I'm curious, in your world,
Yeah.
and in kind of what you heard around CBC, with, I think, kind of the boom times of the industry have certainly, I think, the industry has changed. I think we've gone from dream big to, I think small and think more local. Are you seeing different thought processes with your clients around how they're thinking about distribution?
Well, one of the things that I encourage, and I did in my talk as well, is that, most people will think, well, I want to be in all the big markets, right? We have to be in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles. And really, that is not the place to push the gas pedal, because everybody wants to be in those markets. And so those markets are flooded. It's really difficult. And I feel like you're using your time, energy, resources, budget, like pushing, a very large boulder up a hill, where if you really know who your consumer is, and finding those consumers in much smaller markets, you're actually going to have a lot more distribution and velocity, and you have more success stories to sell. So, I would encourage people to really look at those smaller markets where your consumers are, and really, go big in those areas, and then you can expand that way in those markets, and that's perfectly fine. You may be selling a lot more of your products when you're doing that than just trying to be on a shelf in New York City somewhere.
Yeah, I think about, and I think we heard this. I heard this a lot at the conference, that the industry as a whole is trending towards like thinking smaller, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. If a client came to me and said, "I want to open a new brewery in Cleveland," the conversation I would start to have with them would be around the idea of, well, we have 30, 40 breweries, 50 breweries in the greater Cleveland area. It's over 100 when you kind of expand to the larger metro area already. And, how are you going to gain market share and traction when you're competing with 100 established brands versus, I think the model is, I think like a brewery in every town, right? But I think of it as like the kind of like the English pub model, where it's kind of the center of a community, and there's so many small towns that don't have breweries, and using that as the model and kind of where you're going to open it. So it's the same idea, right?
Yeah.
Big fish, small pond, as opposed to small fish, big pond.
Yeah. And I think the other trend that's going on right now is really, if you're looking at the consumer, they really care more about experiences than they do about products. They're bouncing around from, beer to cider to hemp beverages, wine, like just a little bit of everything, non-alcoholic products. So they really care about the experiences they're having. So I think in a very unique way, craft breweries that can provide experiences for customers is really where they really should be looking to focus now, versus on, of course the product should be great, but not really like honing in on, this is why my distributor should sell this, like really looking to bring your consumers in based on the experiences that they're going to have with your product.
Yep. And you create brand loyalty so that when they are then in the grocery store or at the corner shop looking for a 4-pack or a 6-pack to pick up, they're going to look for your brand, because you've created that brand loyalty, in your tap room. Yep. 100%.
Exactly. I think the best example that I saw of that was, this was years ago in Sonoma. There was a winery. It was a pretty well-known winery. If you got a permanent tattoo of their logo, you would have complete free access to do a tasting whenever you wanted, like a flight of their, and a lot of people had their tattoos, and I thought that is brilliant marketing.
I saw a great, and I apologize if he's watching, but I forget the name of the guy who was presenting, but it was on Tuesday morning at CBC. It was an entire hour on kind of creating experiences in your brewery to draw people in. And one of the things that he talked about was like, invest in like 5,000, like just little wooden nickels. He said you can buy them online for like $30. You can get like thousands of them, like engraved, and engrave them with like free order of French fries. And you put them underneath the top of your six stole as you're packing your beers. And then when someone either in your tap room or out in retail buys a 6-pack of your beer, they pop the beer off, and then this wooden nickel falls out, and it says, come into the tap room, get a free order of fries. If you're in a state where you can give away free beer, Ohio, you cannot. Maybe it's a free pint. We can't do that in Ohio, but there are some states where you can. Something where you are using retail to draw people back into your tap room, and then using your tap room to kind of drive everything. So I thought it was a amazingly fascinating idea.
Yeah, and a lot of these things don't really, it's not a lot of budget. It's more innovative thinking. What other trends were you seeing in terms of your talk or what you do or at the conference?
Overall, were you in Indy last year?
I wasn't. Mm-mm.
So CBC 2025 in Indianapolis felt like a funeral to me.
Oh.
It was down. I mean, it was April 2025. Trump had just announced his steel tariffs. The economy no one knew what was going on with tariffs. The economy was very uncertain. That all the trend lines in the industry were pointing down, like breweries were closing in record numbers. All the reports were, young people aren't drinking beer anymore. Like it's a dying industry. And that attitude permeated the conference, and it was super, super down. It was actually pretty depressing. Indy was a great town. I had never been there before, and I had a great time regardless, but it was a bit of a downer of a conference. I think the BA worked really, really hard, and super credit to Bart Watson and his team to create a really positive, energetic experience this year. The focus was on kind of the tailwinds that the industry is feeling. Trends are changing, but how do we kind of embrace those trends to better draw people in and create fans of our brands? It was a much more, and to me, if 2025 felt like a funeral, 2026 to me felt like a revival.
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. Tremendous energy. I think the head count was about the same. I heard about 8,000 people, and that's about what it was in Indy. So the size of the conference was about the same, about half. The first CBC I was at was Nashville 4 years ago, and that was I think 13 or 14,000 people. So we're close to half in terms of conference size, and whether that's half the breweries are attending or they're just sending the breweries that are attending or sending smaller teams. I mean, I don't know. I don't
Mhm.
obviously have access to that information, but so size wise, it's about half, but the energy this year felt so much more positive than what we saw last year. And it gave me a lot of hope that the industry is not just doing well, but is really thriving despite all of the, I mean, you can go read any, just do a Google search for craft beer and you can read any number of obituaries for the industry online. And I just don't think they're true. And I think the conference to me reinforced that that's not true.
Yeah, yeah. I had such a great time at the conference, and like you said, kudos to the Brewers Association. This conference was one of the most well put together conferences and organized. I mean, I'm sure you had too. I've been working with them, I think, since November. They've
Yeah.
been working so hard, amazing, and right, people don't realize all the effort that goes into something behind the scenes. Um,
Yeah.
but
It's the only conference I speak at where, um, like you have to submit like an outline and then a presentation draft and then a revised draft and then I mean there are so many layers of drafting and review that go into the presentations. There's so many. They obviously get way more people submit to present than get selected to present, and so it's a very curated menu of presenters and topics that are being presented on. And there's a lot of thought that goes into what presentations are going to take place over the course of the conference, and it's always an honor to be selected to speak because I know it's a highly competitive process to get picked to speak at CBC. But the level of review is amazing, and it is for that reason. And kudos to Mackenzie, who does a great job putting the whole thing together. But it is the best organized conference I speak at every year.
Yeah, I thought so too. And to me, it just shows how much they care about the people that are attending the conference, like the level of education that they want people to have, and how important it is for them. Which is amazing. Yes, and big kudos to Mackenzie. She did an amazing job. There was one thing I wanted to say though. You said if this year was a revival, one thing I really had stressed in my talk, and I don't know if all craft brewers know this, but their products, the margins for distributors and retailers are much, much higher than your average streamlined beer, like the number one and number two and number three selling beers. Those margins, they are much, much smaller, right? They have the volume. So that is a huge advantage when you're talking about your product. And I think just knowing I talked a lot about knowing your numbers and metrics and things like that, but like the craft beer industry is always going to have that advantage in terms of margin. So that's a great starting point for people to really kind of feel empowered, even though the industry is changing. They still have that leg up in the industry, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Any favorite breweries you visited in Philadelphia? I grew up in Philly. I obviously live in Cleveland now, but I grew up in Philly. I was too young to drink when I was in Philly because I was in high school, to drink legally when I was in high school. So didn't do the craft beer scene when I was in high school. But it was good to be back. It was nice to be in a town where I didn't need Google Maps to tell me where to go. I kind of just knew my way around it instinctively. But it was good to kind of experience the Philly beer scene. Did you have a favorite brewery you went to when you were in Philly?
Unfortunately or fortunately, I had another business commitment on the 2 days
Oh
before.
no.
I know. So I flew in really late. I think by the time I got to my hotel, it was after 1 o'clock in the morning. And then I was speaking at 9. So I didn't really get to take advantage of all the networking and welcome parties. But hopefully next year I will, get to have all of that blocked out.
Did
So
you get a did you get a cheesesteak at least before you left town?
I didn't. I didn't.
Oh,
But you know what? I'm not that far from Philly. I'm only about an hour and a half, so I can go back and enjoy it without the stress and pressure. And in the summer, have a nice brew there.
there you go. There you go.
Did you have any favorites that you went to?
Human Robot, which is in Fishtown, which is kind of north of Center City. When I was a kid, um, if I walked through Fishtown, I would have gotten shot or mugged or disappeared. It was an awful, dangerous. Like Fishtown was where people went to buy their drugs and do other illicit things.
Wow.
It has been wonderfully gentrified. I guess it depends on your view of gentrification, but it's been wonderfully gentrified with nice townhomes and apartment buildings and condos, and lots of bars and lots of breweries and lots of restaurants. And Human Robot, which specializes in like Czech lagers, I was there twice, and I was only in Philly for 3 days. So to go there, to spend two of my nights at the same brewery, or at least partly at the same brewery, says a lot for what I thought of the place and their beer. It was fantastic.
That's great. And that goes back to experiences,
Yep.
right? That fosters brand loyalty, which is great.
Yes.
Awesome. I want to thank you so much for your time. Two things I want to ask you. What would you like to leave people with, a final thought? And then how can people get in touch with you?
Final thought, I'll just reiterate a point I made before, which is, I mean, your culture is what you tolerate. If you want a positive, healthy workplace, you got to model that. If you're the owner of the business, the leader of the business, your team is going to look to you as to what behavior is acceptable and unacceptable. And you can't hold people to a standard that you don't hold yourself to. And so that is my parting thought. In terms of how to get a hold of me, I don't hide. I'm super accessible online. You can Google John Hyman employment lawyer and you'll find me easily. But my law firm partners would be very upset with me if I didn't say you can find us at wickenslaw.com. You can find information on our beer practice, specifically at ohiobeerlawyers.com, which has all the information on our craft beer practice here at the firm. I also I publish on LinkedIn every day. You can find me my blog, the Ohio Employers Law blog, ohioemployerslawblog.com. But all that information's on our website, wickenslaw.com. So that's the best way to find me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Also, I've been talking a lot about the consumer perspective. So my company, Newborn Evolution, we host executive forums quarterly. There's no cost to those. And our next one is May 13th. And I'm actually having a panel discussion so that we can get an inside view of what the consumer is looking for and thinking of. So we have an owner of Bonefish Grill. We have a big packaged goods store in wine and spirits, and we're securing our third guest. But if you're listening and you'd like to join, if you're in the alcohol beverage industry, the craft beer industry, just connect with me on LinkedIn and ask for an invite. We'll send it to you. They're by invitation only because they're really for high level leaders. It's a safe space for conversations to happen. We don't videotape them. We just have these quarterly so that we can have high level leaders having these discussions together. So I hope to see you there. Thank you so much, John. And you can feel free also when the live ends, if you want to put any of your links in the comments, feel free to do that so people can easily find you.
Sounds great. Fantastic.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for the invite. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yep.
Have a great day.
Take care. Cheers.
Bye.